What's up, headbangers? Welcome to another episode of the Talk Louder podcast, where we geek out on all things rock and roll. Hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel. Leave us your likes and comments. Follow us on iTunes, Spotify, Instagram at talklouder_podcast. And of course, our website, talklouderpodcast.com, where you'll find links to our merch and all of our previous episodes. I'm Metal Dave Glessner, along with my co-host, Jason McMaster. And today we've got a guy who is a walking encyclopedia of hard rock, heavy metal. He's got a career to back it up. He's worked at Metal Blade Records. He's worked at Capitol Records. He's worked at KNAC.com. He's a DJ. He's an A&R guy. He's a champion of heavy metal. DJ Will Howell is on.
Came on my radar, Mr. William Howell, before there was a DJ in front of his name.
Yeah.
I think I used to see his name in the special thanks on a lot of the records I was buying when I was in high school or right after that.
That's your first clue, right?
Mid 80s, right? Probably more Metal Blade record releases than other labels, but I'm sure I read his name in other capacities, probably even in special thanks and some demo tapes I had gotten. No surprise, he's a big part of the tape trading in the underground. The stories that he tells today about him, well, who's this guy? And that guy he would keep seeing at all the local metal shows was one Brian Slagle, the owner and king of Metal Blade Records. I can't recall how me and Will started fraternizing, talking on the phone or whatever, but I do have memory of going to Metal Blade Records when he was there as late as 86 or 87, and then my departure of in question of Watchtower being on Metal Blade in some capacity. And then when I was not long after I had jumped ship, so to speak, I was recording the first Dangerous Toys record, just a couple of, a year and a half later, or something weird like that, at Sound City. And I got to, hang out in person with the man, the myth, the legend, William Howell as well. And it was really good to sort of hear, because we had never really sat down to where I knew his background, I didn't even know he's from the Midwest.
Yeah.
So we're going to learn a lot today. I think it was a really great episode today, finding out a lot of information about that guy, that DJ Will that you see on that metal show and pretty much everywhere. If you go on Monsters of Rock cruises, he's always there. If you go to if you're on the West Coast in the U.S. and you go to rock shows, you're going to see Will there. And I'm sure you have. Listeners and supporters of the Talk Louder podcast, I present you DJ William Howell today as our guest. What is your background? How do you what got you into metal? What got you into rock music? Because it just seems like eventually we end up talking about that, and this doesn't have to be a from the beginning type of a conversation we're about to have, but how do you walk into older brothers, friends from school? What kind of music did you fall in love with and get your music journey started, whether you wanted to be in a band or play guitar? I think I know that you play guitar a little bit, right? You play guitar a little bit.
Yeah. A little bit.
What's your story?
Well, I'll just give you the basic beats. I'm from the Midwest, and where all that started was the parents, good old mom, who had a lot of records in her collection. So really what it stems from is one day going through her record collection and just flipping through the album covers, not knowing the content of what's on there. What really drew my attention we'll ease into the rock and the metal, but it was the artwork. It was the graphic nature of, well, not graphic as in like horror, blood, gore, and all that. I'm talking in terms of the majestic beauty of a lot of these great album covers, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, on and on and on. So you had Led Zeppelin, of course, is in the mix, but you had these great album covers with these great logos that just basically drew my attention to them. And as I would, look at them more in depthly and start to read the lyrics and then eventually put them on the play. So that's really what it started. It started my mom's record collection. So
were you a teenager yet, or was it preteen?
No, preteen.
Wow. Okay.
Young curiosity. And, that's kind of really where it started. And that got me into the whole aspect of learning more about these really cool looking bands that had something very unique about them. So that's how it started for me.
Did you have a record player? What age did you get your first record player?
Man, that had to have been 7 or 8.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
And obviously it was pre Fisher Price record player. We're talking one of those big component consoles.
Oh, like
the radio,
like in the living room kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was hers initially. Had the radio, stereo, record player, with the big dust cover, the whole deal. So she eventually gave hers to me, and I had that for quite some time.
Nice. I love those.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
When you initially got hooked on music, did you have aspirations of being a musician, or did you just sort of appreciate the artwork and then maybe listening to the radio, you kind of aspired to be a DJ? Were you targeting being a guy in a band, or was it some of the peripheral stuff that sort of appealed to you?
The band thing was intriguing initially, looking at it as, ooh, I want to be up on stage. I want to be a rock star. But that slowly went away because I got more and more focused with going to shows, going to concerts time and time and time again. I'm like, yeah, at some point there was that early notion of like, I want to be up there just like these guys as well. But I drifted towards more behind the scenes, learning more about all these bands. And then that sort of lent its way to live recordings, demo tapes, and gradually getting into that world because I found it more intriguing that other people share the same interests with me that are on the other side of the planet. And, long before the internet, long before you can send an email, we're talking handwriting letters, putting on stamps, and, hey, send me your list. This is a band that I followed for quite some time, and you have this live recording that I knew nothing about. Can you send me a copy? So that sort of found its way towards the late more early 80s, I should say. But it was more fascinating to learn more about other people's commonality of these rock bands. So I appreciated that.
Yeah. You eventually went on to work for Metal Blade Records and Capitol Records, and obviously you do DJ work. Did you have any role models in those capacities? Like since you weren't going to be a guitar player, maybe Jimmy Page wasn't your hero, but did you have a DJ that was a hero, or an A&R guy, or somebody that you sort of wanted to model your path after?
Not necessarily. The industry was, it was kind of all encompassing, the marketing, radio, retail, the A&R department, the promotions department. So with Metal Blade, we were really a one-stop shop. And I really owe my whole career to Brian Slagle. He was the one that hired me,
Right.
seeing each other at every single rock and metal show, and a lot of instances where it's bands that are on Metal Blade Records. I would be at those shows. So over a period of time, he just said, what's this kid's deal? I always see him with a skateboard, and he's always at these rock and metal shows. Let's see what he's all about. And then that's really where it led itself into my first entrance to the music biz. So starting out small, then going to a major, all a learning process, a lot of it on the fly. It was more of passion and energy about underground bands, about music, about discovery of a lot of hungry bands that haven't yet made it at that point, the mid 80s and whatnot. So really, as someone that was influential and that was important to me in my career, definitely Brian Slagel, without question. The DJ stuff came much, much later, because the DJ stuff was a component of collecting all these tapes, collecting all these 45s and records over a period of time. And that just became I call it the heavy metal hoarding process, where, everything that I've accumulated the last, 35, 36 years, majority of it I still have. So that was a product of, hey, we have this party, do you want to DJ? So that came probably 20 some years later, but I would say it all worked out.
Yeah. I think that going back to Slagel, running into him at probably some of the earliest concerts, probably not just in Orange County and LA County. It was probably somewhat just coastal. Did you ever travel as a young teenager? Were you traveling in your first car to like the Bay Area to see bands play and shit like that, and running into Slagel as well?
Well, the majority of the time I will run into Brian, locally here in Los Angeles. But yeah, of course I did get to travel, take, Greyhound. I mean, this is before I had a license. So a lot of it was, yeah. So a lot of it was getting on a plane or taking Greyhound or catching rides up to the Bay Area. And then when we started to work at Metal Blade, there was, multiple trips to New York, the New Music Seminar, CMJ, and then even South by Southwest.
Yeah.
Good old, so that was, all of that was, again, all part of the learning experience about what it takes to work the label and what it takes to sort of, reach out to other people in the business and connect with a lot of bands outside of Los Angeles. So,
right.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I think I know the answer to this, but you were aware and a fan of Brian's fanzine, right?
Yes, that was one of the earliest fanzines I remember. I mean, obviously outside of the Headbanger fanzine, of course, which came a little later, but Brian's new heavy metal review,
correct,
very early on, with reviews of these underground bands and these bands that I also like. So that was also intriguing, because I didn't really know much about the label aspect at that time. There was discussions about a label being formed, but this was very, very early on, and he was he was at the forefront of being a fan and extending what he does as a fan and doing something like a fanzine, getting it out there. And obviously it didn't have like worldwide distribution, but the important thing is there were write-ups about all these great bands, and he was early in on that.
I believe I have a couple of issues. No more than one or two, but it's very interesting. I also recall seeing just photos in other people's fanzines of Brian, like, of course, awesome heavy metal band T-shirt, but the gauntlets. He'd go to shows and wear the gauntlets, and that just makes him like this, like he's a mogul, but at the same time, back in the day, he's pre-Metal Blade. He's this real guy who's going to shows, and now I'm picturing you guys chumming it up in the front row at whatever, Malice or Savage Grace or something like that. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah. Well, leather and studs were part of the whole uniform. You're wearing you're wearing a, Raven or Tigers of Pantang patch or some type of shirt that, like, I was like, who else knows about this band?
Hmm.
And there's that whole story of how, you know, Lars had worn, or Lars had come to a country club show or troubadour show, something like that. He saw another person with a Saxon shirt, and then they got to know each other. Like, I was like, who's this guy? How do you know about this band? So it actually might have been Brian, if I'm not mistaken. That actually could have been that lineage there.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Legendary.
Yeah.
Legendary meeting. Yeah.
The T-shirts are a calling card, It's like an invitation. If you see someone across the room and you get it, and you guys you're both aware of the same band.
Sorry to interrupt, like a smoke signal. Like you're looking across the valley, and it's like, holy shit, there's somebody over there. We should probably, send some signals and meet in the middle and go fishing in the valley together and figure this out.
Yeah, we have some like-minded people that, like, if he's wearing that shirt, or he knows good, not only does he know good music, but this is before there was a Hot Topic. So we know that he didn't just buy this off the rack. He went to that show, or he sent away for it on mail order, or the fan club or something along those lines. So that was a telltale sign of, like, this was the visual business card, either leather jacket, the studs, or you're wearing, a long sleeve shirt that, very few people had at that time. So, and like you say, a lot of effort went into it in those days. So that was the sign of some true devotion right there, which was also part of the appeal. Indeed.
I got to ask you, because I never get to talk about this on the show, and I don't know why, but you're actually going to have some input on this. I got to ask you about the Goo Goo Dolls, because I'm a fan, and I've been a fan since my buddy turned me on to the Jed record, which of course was on Metal Blade Records. A lot of people may not know that the Goo Goo Dolls started off on Metal Blade Records, and they were actually kind of a scrappy punk rock band before they became the band that we're all aware of today.
Right.
So I wanted to ask you, what was your involvement with the Goo Goo Dolls during the Metal Blade years?
Okay, let me give you a little quick backstory on that and how we all led up to signing them. Metal Blade Records, we had a lot of great bands on the label, Fate's Warning, Armored Saint, Bitch, Lizzie Borden, Hellstar, Hollow's Eve, on and on and on. Brian also had an offshoot label called Death Records.
I was going to bring that up. Yep.
Yeah, Death Records was just sort of an imprint of cool bands that weren't necessarily rock or heavy metal, but they had, some crossover appeal, or they were just heavy. Corrosion of Conformity.
COC,
Yeah, DRI, Dr. No, Beyond Possession, so on and so forth. So Cryptic Slaughter. Cryptic Slaughter, that was another band that comes to mind. So we got into a very interesting gray area where around 86, I think around 1986, I was actually in New York for I mentioned this earlier, the new music seminar. I was in town for that, attended some panels, checked out some bands in the New York area. And I attended, I think it was Guns N' Roses at the Ritz in New York City.
Yes.
And I knew some people that were involved with Guns N' Roses. So
What year?
I want to say it's 86, 87. What's fuzzy is that show, this will all tie in together, so bear with me.
Yeah, that's okay.
Someone will correct me once this is posted, and they'll say, hey, he can't possibly, how can he not know where he was at the show? It's like, I've gone to thousands of shows every year.
Or you'll get it right, and me and Dave will correct you, and we'll be wrong later.
Right. Yeah.
It happens to us all the time. Go ahead.
Yeah. There's always someone just hovering over the edit button or something like that. So bottom line is, the Guns N' Roses show at the Ritz, which is, you can find it on YouTube.
That's a legendary show, man.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it was Great White opened up, or Easy O. It was too nice. Anyway, I was at that show waiting in line, ready to go to the show. I ran into the Goo Goo Dolls manager at the time. The guy's name was Artie Quitchaw. We had struck up a conversation, and then he gave me their demo tape. Now, ironically, they actually had a prior release on Mercenary Records, which was New York based. So they actually had a very early, very first release out prior to that. Didn't really know anything about the band. The name was a little odd, but he just gave me the demo tape. Fast forward to coming back to Los Angeles, going through the big bag of demos that I obtained during my trip. Eventually checked it out, and I said, this is pretty good, kind of punk rock-ish, sort of like a Ramones meets the Replacements. And I said, okay, cool. I dig that stuff. So I was like, all right, this is kind of cool. So what ended up happening was I had an opportunity to say, you know what, let me present this to Brian, see what he says. It's not rock, it's not metal, but I like it. Let's see what happens. So we got an opportunity to see them live. They had toured with Gangrene that 86, 87 years. So we all got a chance to see them. I said, well, could we do something with them? He said, yeah, well, if we do, we can put them on the Death Records label. And I said, okay, let's try that. So that's kind of how all that connective tissue happened. Mike Faley, who was their VP at the time, he's Buffalo based, as is the Goo Goo Dolls. So he was the one that flew out, did the whole contract signing, what have you. But there was a lot of, moving parts to actually sign them to Metal Blade. But the basic foundation of it was just getting the demo tape, waiting in line to see Guns N' Roses in New York City, and then the rest is history. Yeah. Now, granted, it took a while for them to really take off. We had put out 2 or 3 records with Goo Goo Dolls before they really took off at Warner Brothers. Once the Warner Brothers distribution came into play in the late 80s and 90s, that's when things really kicked into high gear. Right. But we at least had the opportunity to draw focus to Metal Blade Records and know that, hey, this metal label signed this band who's doing really, really well. And then just goes to show you that you just never know, because that was not on anyone's radar at any time. There was no big, there was no big, all the labels didn't have their checkbooks out wanting to sign them. This was very, very early on in the mid 80s.
They were a very different band at the time too. I mean,
very, very different, very different. Like I said,
the early recordings, Robbie did most of the lead vocals, and then by the time they signed to Warner's and started to climb, Johnny was doing the majority of the vocals. So they went from sort of this ragged lead vocal to this smoother vocal and incorporating more of the pop and less of the punk and that sort of thing. But for the record, my 2 favorite albums they ever did is Hold Me Up and Superstar Car Wash.
Nice.
Are those both on Metal Blade?
Hold Me Up, yes. Superstar Car Wash.
That might have been the transition record.
That was a transition record. And if I'm not mistaken, that was the one that had the big hit single, the song called Name. Right. Yeah, before Iris was the following record. That's the one that blew up. But I think the song Name was on Superstar Car Wash. And there was a couple other.
Name was on A Boy Named Goo, which came after. Yeah.
See? Yeah. See, the memory's fuzzy.
That's perfectly fine. You've been to a million gigs and dealt with a million bands. I just wanted to pick your brain on the Goo Goo Dolls because I'm a fan, and a lot of people only know them for who they are since Iris and MTV and that sort of thing. But they do have some roots in punk rock, and we actually were signed to a label that once had Lizzie Borden and Armored Saint on the roster.
Well, it's also Will has as well as Metal Blade has roots in Texas quite a bit.
Oh yeah,
you were either courted by or you reached out to Corpus Christi, Texas band Anchor Watt.
Yes,
you had something to do with them being on Metal Blade. Tell us how that sort of connection was made, and whatever you recall about that.
Well, like Anchor Watt, like the thousands of other bands that would send us demo tapes to the label, got it in the mail, loved it. Just straight up metallic punk, the vocals. It just they sounded like an angrier Crumbsuckers. Yeah, and these really metal guitars with solos and the whole thing. And it's like, this is amazing. So I definitely went, full steam ahead and doing something with them. I put them on, going back to the Death record label, I put together Complete Death. That was the compilation to sort of complement the Metal Massacres that sort of started the whole Metal Blade history, with putting a band on the compilation, see which acts, pick up steam, get the most, pick up traction, and
get talked about. Right.
Yeah. So Angkor Wat, huge fan of theirs, and I made sure that Emotional Blackmail from one of their demos was on there, and then we eventually put out a couple of records by them, and unfortunately, it was 2 records. It was kind of the 2 releases, and then they kind of went their separate ways in the late 90s. But nonetheless, when Obscenity becomes the norm, Awake, and the album Corpus Christi, which was completely different than the debut record. But I love those guys. I know that some of them are still keeping the name alive. Danny Lohner, of course, for those of you that don't know, he's gone on to, of course, big. He's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with 9 Inch Nails. So that's a nice little. I'm very happy for him, and the rest of the guys. I'll see the social media and whatnot, but I really appreciated what Angkor Wat were doing and what they're doing for a band from Corpus Christi, because Metal Blade already had Juggernaut on the label. When I came aboard, they were really cool, really technical. I think we went after Devastation. I'm pretty sure that.
I think they ended up on Combat. Yeah. But I know that Rodney had courted. He just started right. We had him on the show. It's been a while ago, but it was the first time that I'd ever had a sit down with Rodney to say, so let me get this straight. You literally just got your record collection and looked at the fine print and wrote down the addresses of the labels and just licked stamps and sent tapes to all the. He's like, yeah, that's exactly what I did. And I was like, oh my God, you need a trophy. because he got a phone call or something from Combat, and he was like, what? So
hey, keeping with the Texas Metal Blade theme, do you remember these guys?
Let's see, hold it up.
Johnny Law.
Yeah. I do remember Johnny Law. Trying to see if I saw them. Do you have a connection to them by any chance, Metal Dave?
Yeah, Eric Larson lives a stone's throw from where I'm sitting right now.
Good Lord,
we're still friendly. We're still friendly with some of the guys.
Yeah, and my wife cuts the bass, Ron McRae's hair, the bass player, and Brady unfortunately is no longer with us. He passed away about 5 years ago, But Johnny Law, they were a big draw here in Austin, and they were another band that was signed to Metal Blade but didn't really fit the Metal Blade mold, so to speak. It was kind of another one of those bands that maybe you and Brian were sort of experimenting with, trying to expand the audience a little bit.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, that just gets into an area of like, let's see what we can do. Start off with an EP or put out a full length album, but if there's nothing beyond like no touring or whatever the case is, there's always a myriad of reasons why there was never a follow-up release or a band doesn't get signed outright. Because, we're not talking big, crazy budgets here.
Yeah.
And then there's other labels, there's other independent labels out there that, can offer something comparable or more in a lot of instances where,
What would you say is your proudest accomplishment at Metal Blade? And then I want to kind of move on to some of the other aspects of your career. But Metal Blade, wow, what a history, a really rich history, and responsible for so much of the metal that we all love, especially in the early stages. And you were there from the beginning. So what would you say is your proudest moment? And also I wouldn't say what's the quote unquote biggest failure, but maybe the biggest challenge that you couldn't overcome while you were there.
Good question.
That's a good question. Well, I'll start with the the good, and we'll go into the murky.
Okay, good.
Again, going back to being hired in the first place, it all starts with Brian Slagle. The staff that we had at the time, John Sutherland doing press, Bill Matoyer doing the majority of the production work, Mike Faley coming in as a more figurehead, along with Brian representing the label. We're talking to the big boys, and we had a myriad of receptionists and what have you, the legal department, Bill Barrow. The interesting thing about having an opportunity to do radio retail promotions with every act on the label, when I came aboard, and then to do the Metal Massacres, to sort of take off from Metal Massacre 8 through 10. I guess my most proudest moment was being able to sign Sacred Reich.
Yeah.
And that actually starts with another Jason, Mr. Newstead, who, of course, was in Flotsam and Jetsam at the time. And he made sure to put a bug in my ear about one of this up and coming Phoenix band. So it started there, and really, much like my energy and enthusiasm over Angkor Wat, it was intensified with Sacred Reich, because I heard a lot of just great riffs and seeing what they were all about. So I would definitely say Sacred Reich, and they're going on tour now as we speak.
Saw them last year.
Yeah, so they're one of the bands that on Metal Blade that are still out there, still thriving and still doing their thing. So I would definitely say guys in Sacred Reich. The murky part would be, this is completely a memory that didn't go as planned. It was a Nashville band called Intruder. We put out about 3 releases with that band. Good solid metal band, but that was a time where they had management that we think we butted heads over a lot of different things. There was a lot of communication issues, matters over artwork, studio budgets, and getting it was a lot of back and forth that resulted in a thing that could have gone better. And so that was probably this was probably 1989, probably one of the last things I was a part of. So that was one. In fact, even though the band is no more currently, that was one of those situations where, had things gone better, we'll never know. Had they toured more, had there been more exposure, on and on and on, put out some decent records. But I just remember, just with the people involved with the band, it was very, very difficult. And I'm very green. I'm still very green, even though I'm a couple years working at Metal Blade. That's one that comes to mind that could have gone better. And so I'll just leave it at that.
What about bringing in a band, or playing a demo for Brian, or whatever the scenario where you really wanted this band, but you knew it wasn't entirely up to you? Of course, you're just you're the rainmaker. You're just trying to you're trying to make the connection and make sure all the right boxes get checked before you turn around and tell this band, nope, you guys didn't check all the boxes. How did that process work? What was you and Brian's process, that assembly line of, and was there any band that you really thought he was going to want to do something with and he didn't?
Good question.
There's going to be,
I mean that we can talk about.
Well, there's 3, and one is massive. Now, this is my recollection, because I know what tapes I got. Majority of them I still have. But he ultimately has the final say. He's the money guy in terms of what his interest is, as far as, listening to it and it's, seeing that there's something there. Well, here we go. One that comes to mind was a band called Mercenary, out of the Bay Area.
Okay.
Great, solid riffs, the whole thing. That was more of they wanted more than just an appearance on a Metal Massacre. That didn't pan out.
Right.
Then we will go with yourselves, Mr. McMaster. Watchtower.
Wow.
I know there was my doing a full court press on trying to do at least a song on a Metal Massacre, and then of course putting out Energetic Disassembly. What's fuzzy is why that didn't happen. I know there was clearly interest on our behalf, but I don't know why we were not able to do some type of licensing P&D deal. Energetic Disassembly was just at that time ahead. It was ahead of its time as far as what you were doing, and as you were labeled on the album, Vocal Insanity of Jason McMaster.
Yeah.
So that was one of those deals where there's this band, they already have a release out. Let's put this out. So I know I presented that to him. I don't know what happened there.
And a lot of those bands, I'm sorry to interrupt, a lot of it doesn't have to be Watchtower. There was a lot of bands that don't fit somewhere, but at the same time, and you'll agree because it's kind of part of what you've been revealing, is that from Goo Goo Dolls to Angkor Wat to Crossover to having another imprint of the label for these things that don't go anywhere because it's not Savage Grace with a metal chick on the front, or Bitch, or there's a certain kind of metal that you guys were all about and that were way behind, but a band that was just kind of odd, I could see why it wouldn't fly.
Yeah. Well,
past the hey, check this out.
Right. Well, here's the big one. Here's the Mount Shasta of bands that I don't know where
reference.
I could name more mountains, but that was the first one that comes to mind.
No, that's good.
This is one that I don't know where the disconnect was, but I have my thoughts on it. And that was Pantera.
Wow.
I got the Power Metal demo tape. Now, keep in mind, everyone knows Pantera, knows their history. Everything with Terry Blaze before Phil came into the picture was a different style, completely different style altogether. Power Metal was the first release to give you some inkling of the heaviness and where it potentially is going.
Yes.
So I still have the demo tape. I still have the bio, the whole thing. And that's one of those releases that we try to do something with it. And I don't know. That one slipped through the cracks. Now, my theory is there was the knowledge of how glammed out they were at that period of time. And we didn't really have a lot of those acts on the label outside of, if you're going to go with looks, I don't really consider Lizzie Borden glam, but, a band called Pandemonium sort of fell into that category. And I'm talking in terms of the clothes, and I'm not talking about the ton of makeup and all that.
Yeah.
We didn't have really any glam acts on our label. I think later on, like, to sort of piss on my own point, there was a band called Crank out of New Jersey. They were glammed up. Yeah, but that came later. But we didn't seek out those type of bands. It was more underground bands that offered some level of heaviness. The label, the roster speaks for itself. I'm not going to go back and rewrite history, but Pantera was definitely one that slipped through the cracks because that came my way. I submitted it, and I don't know what happened there. That's just one of those. That one is the one that's one of those ones that got away. So I don't know.
It's one of those things. Also, if I may intervene just for a second, it's not about me, but that place in between, I think I Am the Night was the name of the record, right? The third release, not the fourth. The fourth would have been Power Metal with Philip. So correct. I think it's I Am the Night, and between Power Metal and I Am the Night is when Mr. Abbott rang me up and wanted me to audition.
Really?
I turned down. Yep, I turned that down, and then Vinny called me about a week later, and I turned it down, and then it must have been, I don't know, 5 months later or something. I see that they have Philip and they're making power metal, and that came out, and that's when the shit started to get for real.
Yeah.
But anyway, just interesting side notes. You know, I turned down an audition. They weren't inviting me to be in the band. It was just some interest.
Yeah.
So
They had something called Projects in the Jungle around before Power.
Well, it's like Metal Magic or Magic
Mhm.
Metal. I always get that wrong.
Metal Magic.
That's the
Magic.
first record, then Projects, and then I Am the Night.
Right.
And then Terry, they lose Terry and they get Philip for power metal. Yeah.
That's interesting. Both of your stories are interesting.
Well, the whole cycle of how, and even we were talking about clothes. I mean, you look at those early Pantera records and they're full on clamming it up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
To know,
but everybody was. I mean, so many.
No,
not everybody. But I mean, even a heavy band like Lizzie Borden, you could even argue that Armored Saint, had a look, and Oz Rocket,
When Will was talking about the prestige and the that the music and the album covers and just the whole idea of Metal Blade was a big influence on rock music, heavy music, metal music. And so when you look at the backs of those covers, listening to the record, it might sound like at the time maybe some of the heaviest shit out there, but you look at the pictures,
right?
And they're wearing, some of them are wearing scarves and shit,
right?
I'm not going to call them a glam band because when I listen, they're not. But listen, in the '80s, you got to admit, I mean, I am guilty as sin, no pun intended. I am guilty as sin. For wearing some of the silliest shit. I mean, I was like Wacko from Raven as a front man. I was wearing like shin pads and stupid shit because I didn't know what to wear singing that kind of music.
Yeah.
And it's so early. You're just following trends as to what you like, what you're into. So it's really nobody's fault. The bad clothes is not really anybody's fault. We were all in this learning curve as a tribe, of hard rock and heavy metal fans, if I don't say so myself. So when you are leaving Metal Blade, and I don't want to open a sore or have it be a sad story, so let's keep it positive. But when you are moving on, if there's no real reason why, or if you got a better gig or whatever it was, how'd you move over to work for a different label?
No, everything was amicable at that point. The Capitol Records at the time, they were expanding their A&R roster, kind of that, out with the old regime, in with the new. So there was a hunt process for A&R reps. So through some navigating, negotiating, putting in a good word for, a few folks, got an opportunity to join that A&R team at the beginning of 1990. So that's really how it happened. I had an opportunity to sort of move up, and that's really what I ended up doing. Now, I inherited some acts that were already on the label, so that made me all the more reason to sort of champion what they're doing, because I guarantee there were very few metalheads at the label, and I found out I was right. I just got lucky with Capitol. There was already, Striper, Poison, they were already in the label, but the heavy stuff, then you had Exodus, you had Megadeth. I think Great White was also on the label.
Rigor Mortis. Rigor
Mortis. Yeah, they had already put out a release by that time. So it's like, okay, let's see what's doing here with the different departments to see what they want to do with all these follow-up records and what they have been doing with all of these acts. So that was an opportunity to try to shine and see what's doing. Unfortunately, it's a very tough road from going from independent to major. You have to be the cheerleader for anything that you try to sign. But it was day in, day out of clubs, going to concerts, going to garage showcases, going through demo tapes. I had an assistant helping with going through all those demo tapes. So completely different process at a major than it was at Metal Blade. But I appreciated the opportunity. And ironically, going back to Texas and going back to something that is a complete 180 of what I was looking at, there was one of those bands that were very quirky that I enjoyed for what they were. And that led me to being able to sign the Butthole Surfers.
I was going to bring them up. Yes.
Yeah.
So your connection to Texas is still running deep here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just like, what's this? And then and the funny thing is once I moved over to Capitol, then eventually, which was crazy, then eventually Metal Blades signs the Galactic Cowboys, King's X, and it's like, what's going on over here? So,
yeah. Covering the bases with Dallas and Houston and San Antonio and Corpus Christi, kind of.
Yeah.
Right. I just like I think we left El Paso out of the mix and Laredo.
Whether it would be with Metal Blade or Capitol, you have this sort of spider web going, and I think it's great.
Half of John Law was from El Paso, so there you could check that box too.
Thank you. I knew there was one shot.
The band was based out of Austin, but two of the guys moved here from El Paso. So yeah.
Okay. We'll honor that. And you think there's 50 states, and out of these 50 states, you've got scenes in Florida, you got scenes in the tri-state area, you got scenes in the Northwest, the Midwest, West Coast. Why must I keep finding myself being drawn to the lovely state of Texas? I don't know. You know what it is? I love it. It's just it's just funny. But yeah. So quick story with that. You have the guy coming over from a metal label, working with, the majority of the roster at Capitol Records, big major. MC Hammer is a big act at the time. We have the Beastie Boys, Bonnie Raitt, Eric Johnson. Those are some of the big acts at the time. Meanwhile, I'm trying to figure out how can I get another rock, band on the label. And it was very tough. It was very tough for the three years I was there. And, it is what it is. But again, it was interesting that of all bands, I was able to sort of make way with a band that isn't metal whatsoever. And lo and behold, that was my swan song there at the label. So
I just want to be a fly on the wall again about you, like walking in with like a demo or some songs or Gibby Haynes or Paul Leary into an office and going, these are the guys. Hey guys, the suits, if you will, introducing
sales pitch.
This is Gibby and Paul from the Butthole Surfers. I hope you guys get along great. Tell us about how that sort of happened and whatever demo or whatever they heard or the legend of the Butthole Surfers out of San Antonio, Texas became to be on Capitol.
Sure. I'll give you the beats as I recall it. So
yeah, cool.
Anyone who wants to,
like I said, a fly. This portion of the Talk Louder podcast is called A Fly on the Wall. Take it away.
They're from Austin, aren't they? Butthole Surfers?
No, San Antonio.
San Antonio?
That's right.
San Antonio. But eventually,
I should know that, Dave.
I should.
San Antonio, don't you know? And then eventually, Gibby, Paul, they wind up being Austin residents.
Yeah, a lot of San Antonio folk ended up moving up here. Son of some bitches.
So yeah, how does that sales pitch go? I mean, that's got to be awkward.
To a point. I will now keep in mind they weren't immediately in the mix. I am newly hired, 1990, but I'm going out to clubs constantly, left and right, and then trying to, round up some things that could be of interest to the label. But this is an era where you're looking for marketability. Are there songs there? Everything was about, do you hear a single? Do you hear songs? It's just like, I'm just like, look, not every band is fit out to have Diane Warren co-write your songs or Desmond Child, puts you in the studio and these big budgets. But that was that era. And I'm just trying to navigate around what my boss wanted, what he's looking for. But I'm still looking for rock acts. I'm still trying to eventually try to broaden their horizons because he wasn't a big rock and roll guy. So that was an uphill battle. Mm-hmm. So later on, I'm there 5-6 months. I come across Butthole Surfers are on, I think, Touch and Go or Rough Trade. I think maybe the Rough Trade label. They'd had a lot of independent releases, prior to 1990, but the album PO'd was on Rough Trade. They were looking for a licensing deal, another P&D deal. So that around that time, Capitol was actively looking for our acts to license. I came across their manager, Tom Bunch, at the time, and we may have met in Los Angeles, just happenstance, or we may have met at possibly South by Southwest, which obviously is very ironic that another music convention allows me to connect to yet another cool band. So that started that cycle of this could be an interesting one. It'll be hard sell with a name, but let's give it a shot. Our president at the time, big Deadhead. That was helpful in the context of he knew about the Butthole Surfers. So we were able to eventually get him to warm up to, hey, could we put them on the label? Could we sign them? What do you think about it? So we got to see them in concert a couple of times. He loved them. But we started getting these conversations about, marketability and all that. But they were warming up to the idea of they'll do well. They've done well independently. So this could be something to pursue.
Cult following.
Yes. Yeah. So that was all of that was in my pitch, my bullet points when we would have our weekly A&R marketing minutes. Every A&R rep would bring tapes. We play them, and this is cassettes. We're bringing cassettes, putting them in the TIAC or the Panasonic, and press and play. And we'll play a song for about a minute or two and get everyone's feedback. Either they're nodding to it or like, just sort of, you can just sort of get the vibe from there. So everyone's playing demo tapes of unsigned bands. So my whole pitch was, and there were other acts that I was looking at to, hopefully do a P&D deal. But with the Butthole Surfers, they came with a lot of notoriety already. So that helped in the sales pitch. Eventually, my boss got to see and meet them, got a good feeling about them. So we're getting all the pieces in play, where from the president down to the VP, down to the different departments, hey, here's a band that we're really serious about signing. What do you think? And let's get your feedback, because it was important, because this might be my first signing, possibly my only signing, and technically it was. We'll get to Exodus a little later, because that was more of an act I already had familiar history with, but they were already on the label before I got there. But with Surfers, this was like the one. So I had to follow this project from start to finish as much as I could. And lo and behold, we were able to license PO'd. And then later on, after I had moved on, we had signed them to like a multi-album deal. And Independent Worm Saloon, that was the one that really took off. That was the one that we had, who was in my room last night. Then there was Gibby's collaboration with Ministry, with Jesus Built My Hot Rod, nonstop, constant airplay on MTV. So all of that helped. And then there was the
Pepper.
The Pepper single. Yeah. Then there was the tour with Stone Temple Pilots. And they were on Lollapalooza. Lollapalooza sealed the deal. Once they were on that first Lollapalooza, that really sealed it as far as getting the label behind them and seeing what we can do with this very left of center band that I didn't expect to be able to sign, and it will happen. So that's really the sort of the origins as I recall it. Now, the interesting thing is there's going to be a Butthole Surfers documentary, and the folks doing this documentary did reach out to me. And these are things that I would have loved to have given them, but beyond an initial meeting about it, I don't know how much of my story, my history with them being signed to a major label will make it into that documentary. But it just goes to show you that timing is everything. And while I didn't get to enjoy the band's success after I moved on, I'm just happy that I was part of that footnote in their career.
Completely valid and important, Will, I think. So you should have a little pride about that.
And just for my own clarity, which album were you affiliated with? The one with Capitol that sort of got them started?
It was the first two releases. PO'd. Okay. Don't ask me to spell that. It's a PIO. You find it. But so it was PO'd, which was licensed to Capitol Records. Mm-hmm. It was like the first thing that we licensed leading into the Lollapalooza festival. But the band were in studio working on songs. I was in the process of getting producers lined up and seeing who would be interested in working with their new upcoming record that they were working on, which led into Independent Worm Saloon. Okay. That was released in 1993, even though they were still working on it in 92. I left label again. Ironically, new regime came in, out with the old, in with the new. So around 93, I was out, didn't have a contract. It was just an A&R rep at that time. Had I had a contract, this, that, and the other, woulda, coulda, shoulda. Yeah. But I was at least instrumental in getting them lined up for that release. That was the one that took off where I said the single "Who Was in My Room Last Night," with all the Robert E. Williams artwork on that video, and it was a great album. And go figure that was the one that went gold, produced by the one and only John Paul Jones. Yes. And to this day, this was this is one thing that, well, here's the door, kid, hit the bricks. One thing I wish I did get was a gold record. So I got one from the Goo Goo Dolls for the release at the time, a boy named Goo, but for the Butthole Surfers, never did. So
I think they might owe you one.
Yeah,
we'll make some phone calls.
Water under the bridge.
Those things aren't cheap, but it's a completely different regime now at Capitol Records. Very few people that are still there, 25 plus years later. But that's just one of those moments where at least I know I did something there. Granted, it wasn't a new and up and coming band, which is kind of the ideal with A&R reps. You find the young, hungry bands that are out there that trying to do something and hopefully get them signed, but it just wasn't meant to be, even though we went after everyone under the sun. But it all came down to the nuts and bolts of songwriting, budgets, and what the VP wants and doesn't want. And, I'm sure Nirvana was in the mix. I'm sure Soundgarden was in the mix as far as signing and like, but, it's on and on and on, just in all different types of music, not just rock and heavy metal, but with so many different labels, with so many different reps. It was a signing frenzy. You see all the different labels at all the different showcases, seeing what the latest band is, the latest hype band that everyone's hearing about. And then it became like, okay, we break out the checkbooks for this act or what have you. So it would just be a continued cycle of, not just Capitol, you had RCA, Atlantic, Elektra, on and on and on. Every label you would fly in reps from the East Coast. And it was a continued cycle of that. So, a lot of healthy competition, but ideally, it was interesting time.
Outrageous band names are the norm these days, but the Butthole Surfers, when that name was being floated out there, What was it like being in the room when you're trying to convince somebody to believe in this band, promote this band? Were there ever any talks where it came so close to them having to change their name? Was the idea ever floated? Was there conflict in the boardroom over this name? Because it was a pretty outrageous name for the time. It still is, actually.
Yeah. Well, tame in comparison to a lot of these death metal bands that I always say the more unreadable the logo is, the heavier they must be. So
you would hope.
Tree branch rock. But,
yeah, exactly. What, you don't read death metal? What does this say? Oh, I can't read it. What, you don't read death metal? Right. So the idea of
the name.
Time frame, not so much the name. I'm going I'm taking a left here. Between like 88, 89 but like you were talking about with the Butthole Surfers record and their popularity of the single Pepper, which I heard on the radio every day for like a year, it seemed like. Which is quite different than, it's like Gibby almost rapping or something, right? It's very strange and different, but the Butthole Surfers is like, what kind of music is that? You see what I'm saying? It's not really one kind of thing throughout their entire career. Sure, it's probably punk, but alternative and rock, and it just goes and goes. It's in every direction. I think that they were highly influential in the alternative music scene, and I think that there's a lot to be said. I mean, there's probably, actors and rock stars that we adore who, have this certain kind of way they do things, and you would never know by listening or by their presentation that they are the biggest Butthole Surfers fan. So what I'm getting at is the change from, you're this, like, I mean, I know you as this metal guy, you're working during a time, 89 to like 93. I knew you were gone by 93, but the point is the style that the Butthole Surfers had sort of like graduated to it quite easily, actually. That was popular on alternative hard rock radio, loud rock radio, playing Nirvana and Seattle music, plus the Butthole Surfers and the Goo Goo Dolls and all of that stuff. At the one right after the other, Weezer, whatever, right? So I didn't mention any metal there. No, not really. I mean, loud rock, sure, but my question is like, you're a metal guy and you were doing deals or attempting to, you were checking boxes. You were trying to be this sort of conduit for popular music and trying to make way for somebody who happened to be called the Butthole Surfers in this sort of like wake of changing of the guard, which is we were all a part of. It's like, do I change my wardrobe? Do I start writing a different kind of rock and roll song so I can fit in, so I can eat? It's like, well, most of us say, fuck no, I'm going to still keep wearing denim and leather. I'm going to, whatever my hair is doing, I don't care. I mean, as we age, we're not really in control of what our hair is doing. So it doesn't really matter to me what's happening there, but you know what I'm talking about. The climate is changing.
Right.
It seems that, I know you keep saying I'm looking for rock bands, but it seemed that if it was going to have any gains, any check any boxes, it would probably not be metal, right?
I was forced to expand my horizons, pure and simple.
Fine, but that's fine.
Capitol was, and like most majors, they're labels that cater to almost every style. Country and Western, pop, alternative, not just rock. That was the mentality that I definitely had to shift my focus and realize that to win over, the bosses, consider the acts that, do have some single capabilities, or there's an image there that they can work with, and not just focus on just the rock and metal bands. Because look at you look at the rosters that were functional at that time. what did they do with those rock and metal acts? Well, everyone knows MCA was not the greatest. As an example, MCA was nicknamed the Music Cemetery of America because that was where a lot of those rock bands went to die. Not a lot of rock acts on that label did well. They were signed, but what did they ultimately do with them? So that was where I needed to really shift focus. And if I'm going to go out and see bands night after night after night, look at all types of bands.
Yeah.
Which leads into the Surfers came in. Yeah, there was discussions about a name change. I already talked to the band about that. They weren't going to sign off on that, and I don't blame them, which they didn't. But there was a point where you get together with a promotion and marketing teams and say, look, even if we initial it BH Surfers, at some point you're going to have to understand that they have a following. If we do things the right way, the best of our abilities in all departments, it will pick up traction and it'll do well. They're touring, the name's out there, but you have to sort of let that go and not think that there's going to be, well, radio won't play it, or magazines won't review it. There was a little of that. There was hesitancy, but eventually we got over it. But the totality of everything that I was a part of and that I work with, not just the Surfers, the important thing was to broaden the horizons and not be so close-minded with the world I came from. And even though that was always my passion, it still is, 40 years later, it still is. But meanwhile, there are all those, and Surfers were the alternative rock. That was actually the avenue in which the radio promotion and marketing teams went through. We went through active rock, not active rock radio, but the college circuits, all those, the college radio, and then eventually you get into the K-Rocks of the world, because that's where they needed to break big. They weren't going to be played on any rock stations, that were strict, like WSOU in New Jersey or KLOS in Los Angeles, or stations of that nature. But it just goes to show you have all the right pieces in play, marketing team, radio promotion, all tied in, then you got a chance here. And just one correction, I wanted to let you know, Pepper was a huge hit with the Surfers, but that actually came after Independent Worm Saloon. It was on an album called Electric Ladyland in 1996.
That was much later. That was later.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, but nonetheless, they were still on the label, still on Capitol.
Well, to even break and have a journey on a major label, and the name of your band is the Butthole Surfers, and DJ Will had something to do with it.
Pretty awesome.
My hat's off.
I want to talk a little bit about your time at KNAC. I used to write for KNAC.com for a few years. My editor was Frank Meyer.
Good old Frank, yeah.
Friend of yours, I'm sure. Tell me a little bit about what you did at KNAC and how long you were there. Let's talk about that aspect of your career for a bit.
Sure. After Capitol and moving into a lot of internet ventures and being part of different companies that, not music related, but that's kind of how career-wise I went into, whatever it took to sort of keep the lights on, pay the bills, things of that nature. I was approached by one of the co-owners of the 105.5 brand, Rob Jones. Mm-hmm. Rob Jones, who still is one of the co-owners of the brand. So he, along with Long Paul and Filthy Phil, those three gentlemen are collectively owned the KNAC brand. When KNAC went off the air, for those of you that aren't aware, everyone knows the black and white logo, the black and white stickers are always in the videos and what have you, and everyone's wearing the shirts, KNAC, the Pure Rock. When 3 years later, KNAC went off the air in 1995 here in Los Angeles, based in Long Beach, California. In 1998, when internet was in its infancy in terms of websites and streaming, all of that became something, as far as the technology goes, something to pursue. How do we extend the brand via the internet? KNEC.com was born 1998. A couple of years after that, Rob had asked me if I wanted to do a shift there. He was familiar with me working with mainly work at Capitol because he was the photographer. A little quick history. Rob Jones is the photographer of the Poison album cover, Look What the Cat Dragged In. So that is his. Yes. Yeah. So everyone can make fun of the Poison album cover and, those guys look like women, but it doesn't matter. It sold millions. It did very well. It still continues to sell. But Rob was a photographer.
Did not know that. Wow.
Yeah. So that's the background there. So he knew me of that. He knew me of shows and just throughout the business over the years. So when he asked me that, I said, sure, I would definitely consider that, doing doing a show. It was very rough, very green, getting into the whole radio setting in terms of, and I didn't really have a name for it. I was just picking up shifts. We had a whole system, all the hard drives, the streaming, all of that. It was cool. I got an opportunity to talk about what I'm playing, maybe give some anecdotal things about, a band or a song. And so it was interesting to be asked to do shifts, and it was a labor of love. It was for the last 20 years until the stream, unfortunately, went away a few years ago. But I did put in 20 years at knec.com and loved every minute of it. We broadcasted out of two locations. One was Manhattan Beach. Well, actually, one was in Santa Monica, then Manhattan Beach, and then finally the physical brick and mortar studio, which was at Raleigh Studios across the street from Paramount in Hollywood. That's where we did our show. And we had, everyone under the sun that would come in there as guests, whoever was, coming through town. So it functioned as a regular radio station. We didn't have the FCC to worry about. This was internet broadcasting. This is definitely pre-satellite radio. Right. Before, Sirius XM came into play. I might be off by a couple of years, but for the most part, there was Z-Rock out of Dallas, Texas. Mm-hmm. They were also in the mix as well. Mad Max, Tracy, all of them, Tracy Barnes. He was early on with streaming hard rock radio. But with KNEC, for me, the last 20 years has been another good learning experience. And it allowed me to continue doing things, promoting rock and heavy metal where I didn't have the opportunities before. So, and it's led to other gigs and what have you, but I enjoyed working there and doing stuff. But nowadays I'm with Total Rock Radio for the last 6 years, which they're based out of the UK, and I still do a show which runs twice a week. So, so at least I'm still doing that. I still have a show, still have a presence in that respect, but the work schedule's a little nutty, but I'm always still a proponent of whatever I can do to promote this music I love so much. I'm all for it.
Yeah. So the presence that maybe KNEC helped you create or keep afloat from your time as just people knowing you from your scene, and even tape trading and people, everybody knows DJ Will, everybody knows Will. Kind of a thing, and your long run with KNEC, did that lead to your time working on that metal show?
Yes. Now I'd known Eddie Trunk, since his days working at Megaforce, because that's basically how we met. We met very early on. God, at Johnny Z and Marsha and Eddie at Megaforce, because they had they were on some panels at the CMJ, which I had spoken about early on in New York City. So I had met Eddie very, very, very early on. So I'm trying to remember how all this panned out. I think I went to a very, very early taping. I didn't email or call him, hey, I want to be a part of it. But as the show lent itself to being filmed in New York, when they eventually brought it out to the West Coast, that's when I attended some tapings, and I got to meet Don and Jim. I had not met them before, but with Eddie, I did know. So that was sort of at least a little feather in my cap that, oh, maybe something there. I don't know exactly how to fit it in. I reached out to the producer at the time, and I had said, wow, I really like what you're doing. You're promoting these bands. Obviously, me and Eddie, we have a lot of similar tastes. And, he started in radio as well, but a lot of what he was doing, I was doing out on the West Coast. But with the show, Jeff was the producer, and I said, hey, if you do that metal show for another season out here, I'd love to be involved in some capacity. But what I found was what they were doing at the taping was, and this is the angle here, the guests that they had on the show were always talking about their upcoming releases or a song. They would get into anecdotal stories about an album's history or a song that they wrote or a tour that took place. And there was no reference other than showing it on the TV, put up the album cover, or they'd flash you a picture of them in some compromising look or something along those lines. But the in-studio crowd had an opportunity, unfortunately not to broadcast, they had an opportunity to hear the songs being discussed or a particular new single that is being promoted. And that's where I came in, on top of just playing a mixture of whoever the artists were at the time. I'd play a lot of their music for all the seated guests at the studio, but due to the broadcasting and the BMI ASCAP costs of these copyright music, anyone who's watched the show knows that they would talk about the things that they've played on, but you would never hear those songs literally for broadcast, mainly because it was expensive as hell.
The publishing fees paid for by a venue, if you will, like a restaurant or whatever. If they're pumping any kind of music in there, they pay a quarterly fee.
Oh yeah, I mean
that's reasons why it's legitimate.
Yeah, and I'll just give you just two quick examples. When Laurence was on, and Kirk Hammett was on, and Brian Johnson was on. Well, you name the Twisted Sister, on and on and on. AC/DC, Metallica, two of the biggest bands on the planet. Could I play Back in Black? Could I play any of that? No, but I could play it for the studio audience. The Metallica songs, of course, I have everything. But in terms of playing it to commercial, it wasn't a thing. But I was still part of the team where not only did I DJ for the studio audience, I also had an opportunity to connect with the whole Stump the Trunk segment. So a lot of people don't know this, where I would actually provide a bunch of questions, and I'd give, I would fact check a lot of them, because their whole department was, and if anyone who's watched the show, the whole Stump the Trunk segment, it's just like trivia. It's just all that. I'm like, this is the idiot savant coming out of me, like, oh, this is right up my alley. So I would submit, okay, who are the guests this time? So I would just rattle off, okay, well, here's about a dozen or so questions and answers that will it make it to the final edit? I don't know, but I've already given my input, and it was, for me, and just being there, it was just added value. So I didn't necessarily have to be on screen. Every now and then they'd cut to me for something, but it was not to be the fourth member on that metal show. But I was there for 5 or 6 seasons, for all the duration that they filmed in Los Angeles, except for the first season. So 7 through 12 or something like that. And great experience to meet all these different performers, a lot of the ones that I've looked up to, that I know. And it's just great to just sort of, hey, I get to play your music. And, even though you're hearing it, the people watching it won't, but I'm still part of it. So it was cool. Yeah. And the artists appreciated that, because, when we would go to commercial break, play something, and they start looking around and they point up to the ceiling. I'm like, oh, that's the song we were just talking about, or that's the new single. Like, I remember a band, Kill Devil Kill, which featured
Rex.
Yeah, right.
Rex
they
Brown.
had perfect example. They had a brand new album out at the time. No one's heard it. I reached out to management. I actually reached out to Vinny. I said, then Vinny and Rex, I said, hey, look, you're going to be a guest on the show. You're going to talk about this new music. Connect me with their management and let me assure them that, hey, to promote your appearance on that metal show, if you allow me to play 2 or 3 songs from their new album, just know that it will not go to broadcast. No one will have access to these songs except me, and it'll just be for the taping. So again, it just goes to that added value that they're going to talk about this new music. And meanwhile, the people, there's like 50, 60 people in the stands, sure, but they will have a memory of, oh, we got to hear it first. We got to hear it before anyone else. And meanwhile, that was part of the allure, that these are things that I can do, not just play tons of Pantera or tons of, Dio selections or Dio era Black Sabbath songs. That was part of it. But anything that the artists were there to talk about, promote a new book, whatever, coffee, whatever, I had the music. I had it locked and loaded. And that was, that was my contribution to that metal show.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I've got one last question for you. And I wanted to know, as a guy who's made a career out of having your ear to the ground and looking for new talent and discovering new talent, what's a band out there that we should all be paying attention to right now?
Wow, good question.
Very good question. Very open and a very, very good question. Wow. Wow. See, there's a lot of them that are established. There's some that are up and coming. Ooh, that's a good one. That is a good one. Boy, that's a good one. Might have to do an edit here.
Well, I have to leave in about 2 minutes, but I wanted to get 1 or 2 names out of you so our listeners would have something to, explore based on the recommendation of DJ Will, whose track record is impeccable.
Oh boy, the pressure is on.
See what he did there to you, Will? He kind of screwed the pooch on you there.
That'll happen.
Better make it good.
Well, I'll give you an established one first. Hardcore Superstar.
Yeah,
from Sweden. Love those guys. I'll be seeing them on a Monsters of Rock cruise coming up a couple months, but that's one that comes to mind. Another up and coming band, keep an eye out on. There's a band called Attack of the Rising, an incredible, really strong metal band in the Los Angeles area. I would definitely give them high marks. The singers from Brazil, really good, Dio-esque falsetto, really, really good. So Attack of the Rising from Los Angeles, California. That's a band I would definitely recommend to keep an eye out on.
Awesome. Hardcore Superstar and Attack of the Rising.
Yeah.
There's your homework, kids. There's your homework. Go explore Hardcore Superstar and Attack of the Rising. Man, we've had a great time hanging with you today. You're just like one of these guys like Jason, where the brain is just this encyclopedia of metal knowledge, and I just love tapping into that sort of stuff. So thanks for sharing all your stories and your history and your career, man. What a great career, and continued success with everything you do. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Metal Dave, and thank you, McMaster, the pastor of disaster. So,
yeah, of course.
So thank you, gentlemen, and thank you both for what you're doing with your podcast and having all these great guests giving their input and talking about the world of music and what they do in the confines of this world that we love so much.
Well, we love it because we're nerds ourselves, if you couldn't already tell. So, yeah. You're always welcome to the party, man. On behalf of my co-host, Jason McMaster, I'm Metal Dave Glessner, along with our co-host today, DJ Will. I'm going to call you a co-host because you are a DJ and you are a broadcaster, and he's holding up a Texas Longhorns shirt, ladies and gentlemen.
Look
Hook
out.
'em horns, baby, hook 'em horns.
He's got clout. Yeah, his coffee mug was an Austin, Texas coffee mug, too. So
it sure is. Yeah. DJ Will on the Talk Louder podcast today.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you, gentlemen.